Look, I want to firstly start off by welcoming you all here, and despite a poor morning, there's a great crowd, so thanks very much for making the effort. Especially want to welcome the relatives of James Melia, Thomas Lennon and Joseph Ferguson that have come to join with us here this morning. This morning at 8 a.m, as we stood outside Aiken Barracks, we marked exactly 100 years to the day that the Free State forces executed or legally murdered the three men we're here to honour. We're going to hear a bit more about these men from our main speaker, Rory O'Murrough, shortly. But I just wanted to say how heartened I am to see so many people here this morning. There are family members and also people who appreciate and wish to honour the sacrifice of these brave men. Looking around here this morning makes me sure these men will never be forgotten and will always hold a special place in our local history and in our hearts. It's important that events like this are held to teach the next generations of the sacrifices that these men and others have made. As Rory will tell you later, James Melia's father and mother had both died when he was arrested and executed. His father had actually died in 1918 on the SS Dundalk when he was torpedoed by a German U-boat. A memorial to those from Dundalk who died, including James's father, who was a crewman, was put up on the Navy Bank in Dundalk, a stone's throw from where his son was executed. This week that memorial was vandalised, obviously by people who have neither knowledge nor respect for their local history. So that's why it's very important events like this are held. Very important. James Melia and Thomas Lennon were both from the town here in Dundalk, and Joseph Ferguson from my neck of the woods, a proud Coolie man. So I'm proud and honoured to chair this event here this morning. So without further ado, I'd like to call on anyone with wreaths, please, to lay them on the plot. Thank you.
Just put them on the wall.
No, you can walk around and then go on in, yeah. Thank you very much. Can I now ask you all to observe a minute's silence in memory of James Melia, Thomas Lennon and Joseph Ferguson, together with all the Republicans buried here with them, and memory of all those who gave their lives in pursuit of freedom and peace in our country. Thanks very much. Now, I'd like to call on our main speaker for today, our local TD, Rory O'Murrough.
Guramaigad Anton,
gur maigat Fiona Fosta. Look, the fáilte roimh go léir agus ma dinne ag genú cuimhnachán ar na fir corú chun bás ag an Saoirstát céad bhliain ó shin. Look, you're very welcome to this place as we remember those that were executed 100 years ago. So on the 22nd of January 1923, 3 men were executed by a 6-man firing squad at the military barracks on the Point Road in Dundalk. This morning we are going to remember them and the sacrifice that they made on that particular morning 100 years ago. We will also remember all those who gave their lives for Irish freedom. The executions of James Melia, Thomas Lennon and Joseph Ferguson came just 1 week after the executions of Thomas McKeown, John McNulty and Thomas Murray. And again, like Anton, I'd like to welcome the families of these men here, and it is vital and important that we remember our history and particularly the difficult times that occurred 100 years ago. James Melia was born in Dundalk and he lived all his 20 years in the town. He lived at number 2 Bridge Street with his uncle Frank Rooney. James's mother and father were both deceased, his father having been a crew member on the SS Dundalk, which was torpedoed by a German submarine in 1918. James's brother Peter was also incarcerated in Dundalk jail. James was captured along with Thomas Lennon in a car, and both were charged with having arms and ammunition in his possession without proper authority at Dowdall's Hill, Dundalk, on the 7th of January 1923. Thomas Lennon was one of several brothers, and at least one of them had been jailed at the time. Thomas worked in a hardware establishment and was described by those who knew him as a quiet and obliging lad who was not known to have been prominently identified with any political movement. But it's also fair to say, in a last message to his mother, Thomas sent the message, not only his love, but he also declared his preparedness to meet death and stated that he would die quite happily. So I think that shows the level of commitment that the man had. On the same day, Joseph Ferguson from Giles's Quay, was aged 27, was captured at Lordship Hall, and he faced a similar charge of being in possession without proper authority of arms and ammunition. Joseph was described as a fine, well-built lad. He was tried by a committee and executed along with James and Thomas at the barracks on the morning of the 22nd of January 1923. Joseph was also described as very popular in Giles's Quay and the country round about. Some years before, he had been a prominent member of Cooley Kickham's football club and was a well-known figure in local football contests. The deaths that morning were reported by the Meath Chronicle, and I think it's worth reading out the short news report. All 3 accused were found guilty of the charges against them and were sentenced to death. The findings and sentence were confirmed. The executions took place today at Dundalk. Joseph Ferguson, James Melia and Thomas Lennon were executed in the military barracks. News of the executions shocked the town, particularly in light of the fact that Thomas Lennon was only 19 years old and James Melia just 20. The executions in the barracks took place in an enclosed area on the Point Road side to the rear of the present transport complex. The patrols and raids by pro-treaty troops continued into 1923. We also have a letter that was written by Joseph Ferguson to his mother before his execution. I think it's worth reading this so you get a sense of the people that we're commemorating. My dear mother, do not let this grieve you, but I know it will. I am happy and prepared to die, and it is all God's holy will. There is only a few years in the difference. I am as happy here as if I was at home. Canon Donlan, in coming to see me, I am waiting on him. I will tell him to visit you, and he will take this letter to you and tell you all. So do not worry for me, for I will pray for you when I am in heaven, where we will all meet someday. I am writing to Mary and Annie. Tell Danny not to forget them, and anything he can do for them, let him do it. Give Mary one of my photos. There is a football in my room or somewhere. Give it to her. There are also a few photos of me and Mick McKeown. You can let her have one of them. Tell my brother Danny to make the drills for Owen, as I promised I would have the work done. Tell my father that I send him my last goodbye. Also Danny, Nellie, Michael and grandmother. Remember me to Margaret, Mary, Paddy, Tommy, Richie, Annie, Minnie and the baby. God bless them all. Tell Michael, Catherine, Patrick and Annie Connor, John, Fern and Longboat, James and Annie McArdle, Thomas and Annie Fern and Seamus O'Hanlon. I wish to remember them all. So dear mother, do not let this worry you. Be proud that you have a son that you will meet in heaven, who died for the Irish Republic like a man. I will meet death like many a brave Irishman did before. So be proud of my death, not sorry. My death is a triumph for the cause of Irish independence. Let Danny have my bicycle and keep it in remembrance of me. Tell Jimmy Hanlon to remember me to all my old girls. You can show him this letter. Remember me to Mrs. Jordan and all the girls. This is all I have to say. So dear mother, do not let this grieve you. Brave it all for God and Ireland's sake, and he will reward. For I am dying a happy death, better than some poor boys who died on the mountainside and no priest near them. Be of good heart, mother. It is all God's will. I will say goodbye, mother, father, and God bless you all. From your loving son, Josie. Look, I think it's very important to read these letters as we remember these men, because it shows not only their commitment to the Republican struggle, but also that human element and the fact that there were families that were left behind and absolutely devastated. Because sometimes we can see deaths like this as statistics. And I think it also shows the absolute barbarity of the executions and the particular place that the Free State was at that point in time. I'm also going to read out, it's a very short letter that Mrs. Lennon received informing of her son Thomas's death. Again, all the families would have received this. To Mrs. T. Lennon, Dowdall's Hill, Dundalk. Madam, I am to inform you that Thomas Lennon, Dowdall's Hill, Dundalk, was tried by a military court on the 8th of January 1923 on a charge of having possession without proper authority of one Colt revolver fully loaded and 6 rounds of .45 ammunition at Dowdall's Hill, Dundalk on the 7th of January 1923. The accused is found guilty and sentenced to death. The sentence was duly executed at 8 a.m. this morning. Yours respectfully, A. McNeill, Commandant, DAAG, Dublin Command. So that was beyond straight to the point, and it gets an element of the callousness of the state. And there's many would say that this callousness and these executions, and we talk of not only the 81 executions, but over 150 extrajudicial killings, and the deaths by the mountainside, and we know many killings in Kerry, such as Ballyseedy, are those that we remember. But again, a huge amount of Republicans that were executed in the most dreadful of circumstances. And some of this has led to the fact that this state, whatever legitimacy an awful lot of people might have thought it had, it lost through these sort of actions. Now, it would be a year and 9 months later before James Melia, Thomas Lennon and Joseph Ferguson's bodies would be released to their families for a decent burial. Each of the families received a letter regarding the handing over of their loved ones' remains. We have a copy of the one that was sent to Thomas McKeown's mother, who had been executed a week before the 3 men. But each of the families would have received one of these. Akara, with reference to my letter regarding the handing over of the remains of Thomas McKeown, I wish to inform you that the transfer to your custody of these remains will take place at Dundalk Jail on the 28th of October between the hours of 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. The necessary instructions have been issued to ensure that a hearse accompanied by 2 relatives or friends of the deceased will be allowed to enter the barracks for this purpose. It is desirable that relatives should attend as soon after 9 o'clock as possible on that day. It should be noted that the body is encased in a double coffin and no coffin need be provided by you. The production of this communication on the occasion would facilitate the military establishing the bona fides of the claimants. Misha, Major General, Adjutant General. So, a year and 9 months after they were executed, the families finally got the bodies back. On Tuesday, the 28th of October 1924, the remains of James Melia, Thomas Lennon and Joseph Ferguson, together with Thomas McKeown, Thomas Murray and John McNulty, were laid out in the Labourers' Hall, which is now the site of the Credit Union on Market Street. The following day, on Wednesday the 29th of October, they were joined by another comrade, 18-year-old Sylvester Heaney, who had been executed in Dublin in January for the previous year for treachery by assisting Republicans in the attack of Free State troops at Leixlip and passing them information. Obviously, I'm using the terminology of the Free State and not my own there. While the volunteers were laying there was a constant stream of people paying their respects and praying for them. So on Thursday morning, the 30th of October, Mass was offered up in St Patrick's in front of a large congregation. Thomas Murray's remains were returned to his native town of Navan, and that afternoon the remaining 6 volunteers made their way here to Dowdall's Hill Cemetery. Thousands attended the funerals from all over Ireland. A small company of volunteers in marching order led a float with 3 of the bodies draped in tricolours and floral tributes. This was followed by their relatives. Then came the second float with the remaining 3 volunteers, followed by their relatives. 6 motor cars carried the female relatives, and there were people from all walks of life, including key workers, football clubs, members of Common Man, and many priests were present. It took the cortege half an hour to pass any given point, and there were also thousands on the footpaths. The funeral procession eventually reached the cemetery at 3:30 p.m. Just before the gates, a large number of young men fell out from the funeral ranks and marched in military formation to the gate. They formed cordons around the road to prevent the people from rushing into the cemetery. At that stage, just a short distance up the road, armed Free State soldiers had gathered with 2 Crossley tenders. As a band played in the cemetery, the body of Joseph Ferguson was carried towards the Republican plot. Here followed closely by James Melia, Thomas Lennon, Sylvester Heaney, John McNulty and Thomas McKeown, in that order. They were placed into 2 large open graves at the Republican plot. Only relatives and clergy were permitted to enter a second cordon placed around the plots, despite there being over 1,000 people in the cemetery. As the priests finished the prayers, a number of young men stepped forward and fired 3 volleys over the graves. Mayhem ensued for the next 5 minutes, which must have been like hours. Free State soldiers in plain clothes and in uniform rushed from various points of the cemetery and surrounding fields with fixed bayonets and started firing. When the shooting started, people fell in all directions in terror. Men were heard shouting to lie down and take cover. People can imagine the absolute chaos and terror that would have been happening in this particular graveyard in 1924. And also remember, this is after the end of the Civil War, and it shows you just where the Free State was in relation to Republicans. When the shooting eventually ceased, people started to come out from behind the headstone and rushed for the gate. People were asking, how many are shot? Although there were many injuries, one man was seen to stagger and fall. His name was Joseph Hughes, and the clergy and mourners rushed to his side, where they discovered Joseph had been shot in the abdomen, and they took him by the car to the Louth Infirmary. Joseph Hughes died from that fatal shot. There was an inquest to follow, but we can leave that for another day, and I think people can imagine how the state dealt with such incidents. Today we honour James Melia, Thomas Lennon and Joseph Ferguson, 3 Republicans who gave their lives for an Irish Republic. 3 families who had to suffer greatly on that basis. And I think it's only right that we remember that these men died for an Irish Republic. An Irish Republic that promised much, that promised the proclamation of 1916 and the democratic programme. later. And this is a promise that has not been delivered upon to this date. When I think of the Civil War and many things that were done that should not have been done, and we remember the callousness particularly of the Free State and how it dealt with Republicans, we know that we had the formation of two very, very conservative states, a sectarian state in the north. We know that the southern state failed miserably to do anything in relation to dealing with the travesty that was partition, that was imposed on us, that all the people in this particular part of the world would understand. We had a lost opportunity at that stage. We had the Tan War. We had a political and military campaign carried out by Republicans that brought the British Empire to its knees. But as I say, we lost an opportunity. We have an opportunity to deliver a better Ireland, to deliver that republic that all these men in the graveyard, that all those Republicans over many years gave their lives for. And we should not only honour these men, but we should ensure that we deliver a real fitting monument to all those Republicans that have given their lives for Irish freedom. And that's an Irish Republic that can deliver for all its people. So, Guramayaguv Galer.
Right, folks, just before we finish up, okay? Look, I won't hold you as much longer. I just want to thank you all for coming here this morning and making the effort to attend to honour James, Melia, Thomas Lennon and Joseph Ferguson. This is the third event this month to mark centenaries of men who were executed during the month of January in 1923. Their families will never forget them, and Republicans will always remember and honour them. Guramagat, folks.